I want to work now with an example of what is known as a pure exchange economy. In a pure exchange economy, the consumers are endowed with X bar I units of good X each, but there is no production. And instead what happens is that the consumers are free to trade good X. Okay? And the goal of the problem is to characterize the equilibrium as a function of the distribution of endowments, and by the way, let X bar total be just the sum over I of X bar I. What is the total amount of the good I? We want to characterize how the equilibrium changes as a function of the distribution of X bar I. So to do that, notice what is the problem of the consumer. So the consumer problem is to maximize over X greater or equal than 0 its benefit minus P of whatever it wants to consume minus whatever it was endowed with. And notice that this is what it needs to buy, so the net trade. And if it wants more than it has, it needs to buy, otherwise this is negative and it represents a sale. Now notice that we can rewrite this as the maximization of X greater or equal than 0 of B of X minus PX plus P of X by bar star. And notice, this is the key, that this term is a constant from the point of view of the problem that the consumer is trying to solve, from the point of view of selecting how much X to buy. This looks just like income or wealth for the consumer. So that implies that what the consumer demands as a function of P is independent of X I bar, how much it gets. Okay? And in particular, notice a nice intuition that we can think of the consumer problem here as I get my endowment, I sell it all at price P, I just sell it all. And then I decide how much to buy back at price P. That's another way of thinking about it. And that is useful because when you think about it, we can represent the problem as follows. We can think of the aggregate demand, let's say something like this, in the market, which again is independent of the distribution of I's, of the endowments of X, and then of the total supply as a vertical line at X bar total. Why? Because remember, it's as if we can think of the problem as every consumer just selling everything and then buying back according to the aggregate demand that is given just by the solution to the standard problem. So what do we get? We get the usual thing, that there is an equilibrium price, that the equilibrium quantity that has to be demanded, not surprising, is the total amount, because the consumers want to sell it all in this way of thinking about the problem, and that this is the consumer surplus, which in this, for the consumers. Okay? Now, the key thing that we have learned is that the equilibrium is independent of the distribution. Now, it depends on the total. If there is more units, the price will go down, but it doesn't depend on who owns them. Let me emphasize a couple of things. The equilibrium is independent of the distribution. The consumer surplus is independent of the distribution, but I hope that it's clear that the individual well-being, the utility that every individual achieves, depends on the distribution. The more X I bar you get, the more wealth-like enters in your utility just by being able to sell those units. The higher consumption of M, the more utility you get. Let me highlight one more thing that is interesting and previews themes that we're going to cover next unit, which is that the units are allocated to these people that have the highest marginal benefits for them. So who's going to buy these units at price P? Only people who have a higher marginal benefit for those units than what is traded. So that means that who ends up consuming in equilibrium the units is independent of the distribution, and it's always the people with the highest marginal benefits for them.